You're listening to the Bust-Proof Business Podcast, taking your business to the next level by taking you out of it. With our experience and proven results, we'll help you find the success that many crave, but only we can help you achieve. It's time to get started with your host, Greg Murphy.
Hey guys, it's Greg Murphy from the Bust-Proof Business Podcast. Today I'm here with my good friend Nick Jump from BookFrog. A lot of you guys probably know him and his wife, Anitra, who is his better half. Absolutely right. And so we're going to talk to him today about textbooks, about his business model, which is a little bit different than most people are used to seeing. Normally, it's either you buy books in bulk by the tractor trailer load like me, or you go and buy books one at a time from bookstores and library sales and thrift stores and stuff like that. Nick does things a little bit differently. So I guess before we get started, Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and how you and your wife got into this business in general?
Sure. We've been in this business for about 12 years, give or take, about 10 years probably. Anyway, I started buying textbooks from professors about 10 or 11 years ago for wholesalers. A wholesaler is a company that will supply it'll supply a college bookstore with their stock essentially and buy it from a private entity for a set price, and so you have a price list and so forth. We did that for a couple years and then started going well and realized that I didn't need the middleman. So I cut the wholesalers out largely, not entirely, and started selling online and have been doing well ever since. Anitra and I have had a lot of ups and downs, made every mistake you can think of, and that brings us to today.
Yeah, we all make plenty of mistakes, and that's the whole trick. Is that I always tell people I'm not telling you what to do perfectly. All I'm telling you is what I've done in the past. So that's the best I can do, is to make sure that you guys know everything that I've done, right, wrong, and in between, and we can go on from there. Okay, so Nick, so you guys started around, you said about a decade ago,
right?
And what kind of changes have you seen? Because we're seeing some big changes now on Amazon. So what kind of changes have you seen in the past? Has there anything been as bumpy as what might be coming now?
The biggest change for me in the past is waking up and realizing I should be in FBA. I think that happened in 09 or 10. I realize that a lot of textbooks are being restricted now, but that's not entirely new. LexisNexis have been restricting their new textbooks for years now. I hope it doesn't continue, but we roll with whatever we roll with. Big changes over the years. Let's see.
Well, I know there's been increases in fees every year, but I don't think it's really been, and almost all the time there's, the sky's falling.
Right. No matter when you get into this business, it seems like, it was so much better 5 years ago. Well, if that's true, so what? It's still a great business. I don't know a better business model to get into that you can start with nothing and accumulate quickly.
Yeah, books are obviously, in my opinion, the best. That's why we're sticking with them. You can buy them, you can get them from your friends and family for free to start out. A lot of us have friends and family that like us enough to get rid of the garbage in their house. You guys know I talk all the time about how books are garbage to a lot of people, which is why this is an easy business to start up. But let's talk about the differences in your model to, I guess I say normal, like normal to me and many of the people that are watching and listening to this right now, as in terms of buying books one at a time at libraries or whatever, and then in turn, or doing bulk. What do you guys do that's so different?
I think it's in acquisitions is our big difference. So I'll try to, first off, I don't walk by a dollar. So if I see something that has the right markup, of course I'll buy it. I do dabble in games. I do dabble in some of the toys, but our bread and butter was, and always will be textbooks. I usually get most of my inventory from academic sources, such as professors on campus or professors at their home. We also acquire from academic libraries. I really don't pursue normal everyday libraries anymore for the most part. Bookstores, academic bookstores, I love those. They're very valuable to us. I think it's just the sourcing. And most of my sourcing is relationship based, not based on the highest price paid. That makes sense.
Right. But you're buying them mostly from professors, or you do a lot of it with professors and individuals. And so a typical buy is not buying one or two books. You're a lot of times spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars.
Sure. Yeah, we'll go into, if I go into a professor's office and they give me the go ahead, I'll scan with some a couple different types of software to identify what's valuable, and then I'll just kind of, roll with it.
What is the difference between your model and the business model of me or of Caleb Roth or Brian Young or anybody like that? What's the difference?
Sure. Essentially, I go to academic sources, whether that be an academic library or academic bookstore on campus or off campus, something to deal around academic sources like professors, things like that. And I'll either buy out a bookstore, all their dead stock, for example, or I'll buy from a professor anything that they're not using, or I'll buy from a library any leftovers that may have been given to them that they didn't want to add to their collection. I typically don't buy the old stuff, but
How is it that this is so lucrative? Because you're spending, one of the things I kind of tease you about is how a lot of times you're spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars with these professors.
Right.
And so you're buying a lot and so instead of going to a bookstore and buying, 20 books for $3 each, you're going and you're buying dozens, if not hundreds of books from individual professors.
Right. The average sales price is a lot higher for the books I'm getting. So it might be a new textbook that sells for, sometimes 200 plus, or it might be an academic set that sells for, we've had academic sets. What do you think? The highest one was like $1,200, wasn't it? A 3-volume set on telecommunications. I mean, we've had some, it's just those nonfiction, low print run books that really hold their value. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely does. And so I don't see a lot of them in my stream, obviously, because we're buying books by the tractor trailer load. Yeah. And unless a professor dies, or something, another big time when we can get a lot of books from the professors is when they have to move. When they have to move from one building to another, we'll get a lot of books then. But otherwise, we never get access to that kind of stuff. That can sit, as you know, in a professor's office for 20 or 30 years. Absolutely. If somebody like you doesn't come by.
Yeah, which would never happen. There's always someone. Well, I'm just teasing. Yeah, there's absolutely not.
But there is always someone. But what makes you successful where other people aren't is I know for a fact that you work with relationships. That's your number one currency. That's how we got together.
Right.
Is the fact that you'll a lot of times give first and give and then ask.
Right.
So let's talk about how that works. So how is it that you think that you do business different than most people?
It's definitely relationship based. We'll take a professor example first. So I'll cold solicit a professor and I'll just introduce myself, and immediately my first job after I introduce myself is to disarm them, because the first thought that generally goes through their mind is, here we go again. There's another book buyer, or I don't need to waste my time with this. They want to pay me 10 cents for a $50 book, and they won't necessarily take me serious. So I'll introduce myself, I'll disarm well, and then I'll answer objections.
So I'm
not answering your question.
It's okay. No, don't. I think the reason you're nervous is because you can see my beautiful face both in person and reflected to you on the screen at the same time. I think that's what's happening. And your wife is nodding her head yes, so you need to watch it.
This is proof that if you're awkward and anxiety and so forth, you can still do my business model very well.
That's true. That's a good tip.
I've done this I've knocked on doors since October of 2005, and I still get nervous every single day before I go out. And yet I still do great with it, honestly.
Yeah, that is great news, because a lot of people don't have those skills.
Right.
But basically,
I'm not smooth.
No, maybe not. But honestly, basically the difference is that that you're able to build connections with these people. It's not a one-time transaction. Right. This happens over and over again.
So going through the sales process, I'll introduce myself. I'll do my best to disarm them. And then I'll find out what really motivates them, if anything, to get rid of their collection. Now, if they tell me no, I usually try to reapproach after I build a little rapport, but people have different motivations. A lot of the buyers in my field will assume that the motivation is just cash. So they'll just assume whoever's paying the highest price will get the most books. When in reality, it's almost never cash. I'm not saying the price you're paying isn't on the list. Of course it is. But the highest motivation can be, do I trust this stranger who came at my door? Right. Does he seem shifty? Does he seem very fake? Does he seem very genuine? Things like that. I wrote down some of these values.
So while you're getting to that list, I know that for me, and that's people are, and so in fact, someone asked a question today in the group about there are these 1,000 books that are left over from an estate sale. How much money should I offer to give them for the books? And I said, well, first off, just say that you'll take them for free. Like, say you won't even charge them to come get them, because obviously they're left over. And the guy that asked the question couldn't get past the fact that, well, I'm sure they're going to want something for them.
Oh, you'd be shocked. I've gotten $5,000 worth of freebies. Freebies are great.
And it's because of the fact that there's a differential in the value that the books have for them versus the value that the books have for people like us.
Right.
And so, so a lot of times you can get stuff for free.
Yeah. Does your prospect value convenience most? Do they value the money you're going to offer them most? Do they value the space that you're going to free up? If I go to a home visit for a professor, for example, I ask them, first I compliment their collection. I try to get on the same side of the issue with them. Hey, these are beautiful books. What makes you get rid of them? And they'll tell me, whatever they tell me. And then I try to use that to my advantage if possible.
Okay. So when you say a home visit, you mean at their home?
Sure. I put it out there to all professors. I probably do, 1 or 2 a month. I don't do a whole lot, but if a professor's moving, they're changing jobs and moving across state lines, for example, we've had plenty of instances of that, or they're simply cleaning out their garage and they're going to make a man cave. We've had that. We've had the den finally gets cleaned out because it's going to become a nursery for my granddaughter. I've seen it. So I always try to find out why they're getting rid of the collection and see if I can work that in if possible. Yeah. And it's almost never, I need to raise funds for XYZ. It's always a ulterior motive.
So, and that's and I have a buddy you've met Andy before, haven't you? In Dayton. And he almost never, the issue is never about money for him. The issue for the people he deals with is almost always space.
Right.
And so they need the space. Space is valuable.
Absolutely.
It's more, a lot of times way more than just money. And so once you move the relationship from transactional into something else, like I want to help you out, I want to do you a favor, they want to do you a favor. It's very hard for people to, when you give them something, for them not to want to give you something back.
Reciprocation is high. Yeah, absolutely.
And, we say this, it's not about being manipulative. It's not about being anything else. It's just about, you can do good in this business, especially what you do, by being a good dude.
Well, I think it's a sign of respect if you are a careful listener and you value what they value, and if you don't, whenever somebody shares their values with me, whether it's, this is what I value about getting rid of this collection, or this is what I value about the time we're spending right now, or whatever, whenever they share that, there's always something I can latch on to.
Right. So now, how often is it that a professor will have any idea about the value of the books that they have? Right. Like, because one of the things that caught me that you talked about earlier was, these guys want to give me 50 cents for a $50 book. Are professors do they know what the values for products are online?
Absolutely.
Or do they oftentimes over or undervalue them?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. And you have to learn your customer. Like we talked about before, I'll work with a lot of customers over time, and they'll become friends, and I'll have the same customer sometimes 4 or 5, 6 years, even longer. Some of them have looked the books up on one of a number of websites. We all know about the BookScouter and FacultyBooks.com and things like that.
I have not heard of FacultyBooks.com.
It's in BookScouter. It's covered by them, but it's Texas. There's several ways for a professor to find out the value of their books, but that's not why they're a professor. I've seldom met a professor who's in it for the money. That's actually one of the things I bring up when I'm talking price, But usually, a lot of professors, I have a lot of professors that'll work with me that won't work with other people.
What do you think is the difference in what you're doing versus what other buyers of professors' textbooks are doing? What makes you special? Why are you more successful at this than other people are?
Than other faculty buyers. I misunderstood that question. Being genuine and finding the true motivation.
Okay.
Most other faculty buyers go into, I pay you more, or I take more off your shelves. Most professors don't necessarily care about the most money, because everybody says that line. Everybody says, oh, I take old editions, or oh, I take this or that or whatever. I try to find their true motivation and get on the same side of the issue with them.
And so we talked about how you actually do you'll visit their home to try to.
Right. As a follow-up, I'll ask a typical professor, hey, how's it going? Got any books today? And it's sometimes that simple to introduce myself. They'll give me any number of excuses. If they tell me yes, nobody needs to hear about that because that's an easy sale.
Right.
But if they tell me, no, I just don't have time for it today. I know the motivation is, hey, I might consider dealing with you, but I've got class in 10 minutes. Or I'll say, well, what time's your class coming up? And I'll try to work that angle. If they say something to the effect of, I would, but the last guy ripped me off and you guys are all the same. I try to differentiate myself and say, it's too bad. I hate that you had that experience, but I'd love to go in there and see if I could treat you better. I guess what really differentiates me is I'm extremely raw. So being raw like this, being imperfect has been a huge advantage. I've gone in there with scripts. I've gone in there with memorized things where, you recite 10 minutes worth of nonsense and it doesn't get the job done. Whereas if you're extremely raw, extremely fluid and you're one-on-one, it works. And
you can tell that's a difference. You can tell that about somebody if they're interacting with you rather than just staring at your face hole while they're reciting a script.
Right.
And so, I bet that would be more effective. What I do know for sure is that I know that there's faculty members that hate textbook buyers because when I was a student at Wright State, we had somebody come in Mission Impossible they came through the top of the professor's offices
through the ductwork
or whatnot. They came through Mission Impossible style, cleaned them out, and they only took the books that were super valuable, and they would walk out. So, there's people that'll go to great lengths to get these books because these are the ones that have just been released.
Right.
A lot of times they can sell for $100, $200.
Well, and they can be an instant $120, $150.
Right.
I mean, you can.
So outside of training Black Ops style,
right.
To get these books,
I'm very agile.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. But outside of that, do you have any tips outside of, just saying be a person? Are there any things that you've learned not to do outside of, coming in with a script?
What not to do?
Yeah.
Just do your best to be extremely genuine. Listen to the customer and try to answer that appropriately. And always, always, always reapproach. It might sound counterintuitive, counter to what I just said about being such a good listener, but I always reapproach several times because half my job is to jog your memory and get the products you're not thinking about. So they'll say, well, no, not today, maybe another time. And then I'll try to don't accept the first no.
And there's a lot of times there has to be a lot of times where you go in and they say no, or anyone would go in and say no. And you think, well, okay, I guess that guy's done forever. I guess I should never come back there again just because you get told no one time. I would assume that happens a lot.
It does. I can still remember my favorite success story of mine as far as overcoming something like that. I was on cloud nine. I was 4 for 5, but every office was $1,000 plus office. It was amazing. I was like, this is great. And there was a guy at this law school that I never approached because he's always slamming doors. He's always grumpy. He's always aggravated. And I saw him come in and I saw him look at my way, said nothing to me, but it was just kind of gruff and slammed the door behind him. So I thought, you know what? I've already won. I've already won the day. I knocked on his door. He's like, what do you want? Like, well, I'm just buying books, man. I thought you might have some. And I was about that sloppy because he kind of rattled me a little bit. And you can tell I get rattled sometimes. He's like, buying books? People don't do that anymore. Well, see what you can find. And he told me to scan his shelves, and it couldn't have been an easier sale, but no one else had gotten to him. No one else had approached him in years because they could tell he was a pissed off professor who didn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
I learned a long time ago not to prejudge like that.
Yeah. And so basically what our advice on almost everything that we ever talk about is that you have to get out of your comfort zone.
Right.
And so, for a lot of people, and you guys, for those of you that are watching this live on Facebook, realize that Nick is not always the smoothest cat, right? I mean, I'm not making fun of you. I'm just
kidding. You're absolutely
right. But no, I mean,
right.
This is a good thing for them to see, honestly. Because Nick isn't, a smooth operator. No one would say that's been watching this for the past little bit. And not to, you're my buddy.
It's extremely true.
And so, anybody can do this by talking about being a people person. I think what we mean more is that is that you're somebody that tries to build a relationship.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you have to be smooth. It doesn't mean that you have to be shine. It doesn't mean that you have to wear a tux probably to buy the books.
It doesn't even mean you need to be clean shaven. I typically am often less cleaned up than I am now.
That's hard to believe.
Hawaiian shirts are very common for me.
Okay.
And there you go.
These things are all 100% true.
This is my outfit.
He's a fan. He is a fan of the Hawaiian shirts, big time. Let me ask you this: how many times do people say no? I know that it's hard to quantify, but would you say it's more than half the time?
So I used to break this down a lot more. If I was a brand new seller and I had no training, no skills or anything, I would probably still buy out of, say, 1 out of 20, 25 offices. That's without sales skill. That's just with persistence and basic politeness.
Now I want to stop you right there. So that is someone's telling you no 24 times.
24 different professors.
24 different professors are telling you no before someone's saying yes.
Because you don't reapproach.
Right.
Because
Again, I want to go on about that. So there are many people listening to this right now that after being told no 10 times by 10 different professors would quit.
I can give you an example of that is in the same family. I believe it or not, as awkward as I am, I do train sometimes, and I've trained probably about 30 plus people to do this one-on-one, and plenty of them had successful careers. Some of them dropped out, but a little bit of everything. But I remember a specific person, we had done our week's worth of training and we're knocking on doors, and this was test day. And on test day, I would always stay out in the hallway. I would listen. I would be there for encouragement, but I wouldn't do any of the talking, any of the computer work. I would just be present in the hallway just to be backup support, so to speak. His thoughts were, he had knocked on 23 doors in a row and all no's. And his thoughts were always the same. After 2 or 3 doors, he would say, oh, the people here just aren't selling, or it's just not happening, or these guys are different. I need to go to a different school. I need to jump this, jump that. And so every time he got built up too high, too much anxiety, I would say, you tell me when I'm on, and I'll take every door you tell me to take. And I was 4 for 4, and he was 0 for 23. And when he finally loosened up, he had 3 offices in a row, because it really is about being comfortable in your skin, but it's also about being extremely genuine, listening to the customer and responding to what they're saying, not going in there with a pre-made script. And it's also about being efficient. So you have to scan quickly and be able to evaluate an office quickly. And I can do that faster than Caleb Roth.
So you can scan books more efficiently than Caleb Roth, you're thinking for the professors.
Right. But for the professors, if they have plenty of time, I'll scan the entire office. If they don't have as much time, I'll scan the new shiny stuff, right, which you don't have to have a degree to know, wow, those are unwrapped. They must be great. Or, I might ask for this shelf as opposed to this bookcase, but get what you can.
Like you were saying, you had a trainee that was 0 for 20 something.
23 offices, yeah.
23 offices, and he was a no-go. How many people do you think would be willing to hear no 23 times and still keep going?
It depends on how much rapport the person training them has it, or it depends on how bad you want it. I hear 23, 25 no's in a row on occasion. I'd like to tell you it never happens today, but it seldom happens. I'll also go out and buy from my first 15 customers in a row, all 15 of them, and I'll do, anywhere from $30 or $40 paid out, which means I get a value of about 5 times that. So I'm paying around the 20% line, but it really varies a lot. All the way to, I'll definitely hear, what am I doing? I'm doing from all the way to, $300-$400 offices.
Okay, so that doesn't mean that you lose, right? If you hear 25 no's in a row, that doesn't mean you lose.
Absolutely not. Whenever I actually developed an allergy to the word no, I just try to tell myself, and I know it's silly and I sound silly saying it, but every time I hear N-O, I always hear K-N-O-W. Like, you want to know more? No problem. I got you.
No, that's
Here's more of a pitch.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you can't build a relationship at the same time.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing, is that I know that it would be discouraging to me to go and have 25 people tell me no in a row. That would be discouraging.
A lot of times I think they're telling the previous person no that was in there before me because they left a bad taste in their mouth and they just want to know more about me. So I help them out with that.
And we're not nearly as important to these people as we assume.
Right. They could care less.
They could care less. We're bothering them in the middle of their break, or in the middle of what they're doing. We're kind of in the way with them.
That's definitely the low end. The high end is knock, knock. Hey, it's the money man. And I've heard that. I've had people chase me down the hallway and say, I've got stuff for you. Don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. Okay. And then drag me to their office and stacks of books.
And does that happen often on the first time that you visit, or is it something where you've built a relationship?
I won't say never, it's not typical, but it still happens.
So I want to ask you about travel. So don't let me forget to ask you about that while I'm thinking about it. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper to talk more about the training aspect of it. So we have a lot of people that are really interested in talking a lot about this topic. We get tons of questions about this stuff, but and you're going to be talking about that at Busproof Live in June,
in front of all kinds of people. It'll be great.
In front of it'll be better.
Last year I was so shaky, and if Anitra wasn't there with me, it would have been even worse. She was very helpful.
He was also completely drunk. I mean, he was. No, I'm kidding. No, you were good. No, it was fine. It was great. No one can tell unless from that far away, unless you let them know. Right. I mean, Anitra
I was lying. I wasn't shaky at all. Yeah. Very confident.
But let's get back to training. Let's talk about training. So, do you think that you could train me? Here's what I think we should do.
If we went to UK, I can tell you this. Last year there was a ring of thefts there that really screwed the school. So it's harder to buy at, but it would be such a great learning experience.
Yeah. Next time I come down to Lexington, we'll go to UK.
You don't know what you're asking for, buddy.
We'll see if we can record it. Maybe we'll get those glasses. We'll borrow Slammon's as glasses so we can record it a little bit. And we'll go to UK and see what we can do. Before we do that, like now, what tips do you have for me outside of what we've already talked about to do a better job buying from somebody? Maybe that.
So you mean for someone who's cold, who's never bought from a professor?
Like me.
Okay. When you introduce yourself, they already know why you're there. So just get it out. Be short and sweet. Hey, I'm Greg. Hoping you might have some extra books. Be very folksy. Be absolutely yourself. Don't worry about being professional.
Now, should I feign an accent since we're in Kentucky? Should I try to feign? Yeah, I just went to Derby, the Derby parties. So, I mean, I think I could get one down. I'm not going to do it now, but I think I could get a Kentucky accent. I think I could do it.
Be very jovial and just investigate. Do you have any books? Not today. Somebody's looked through them all. I take a lot of books that other people don't. As a matter of fact, I've sold over 10 bazillion books in the last 10 days, and I'd love to buy these. Just work through the objections. Right. Whatever they hand you, whatever objection they hand you, it really is not what you say so much as how you say it. I had a training person once that was really feeling anxiety, and gosh, it was Steve. He was going probably a good 15 offices with no help. He wasn't getting anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I told him, it really is how you're saying it. You're saying it so cookie cutter, so cardboard. You're so worried about getting every word out. You're so worried about getting your company name out. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your name. They just want to know, hey, here's a book guy. Do I have anything? No, I don't. Oh, do you want to waste my time, or do you actually have something for me? And if you can get past that objection, great. So what I did with the next office in that instance was I knocked on the door. It was an engineering door at UK. We could even go to that building if you like. And I said, hey, books. And the guy said, there's the shelf. Because it really is, if you can be extremely casual with them, no threat or anything, and let them know that you're not worried about not getting the customer, they're not going to be worried about it either.
So now, can you tell me what you said again to that guy one more time?
Yeah, it was something like books. Yeah, I mean, it was that simple. Books? Yeah. I mean, he kind of chuckled. And he's like, there they are, because he knew.
Yeah.
They get solicited plenty.
And most of the people are not nice people that I've seen anyway, as when I used to work for the finance department in Wright State.
You mean as far as book buyers
go? Yeah, the book buyers aren't nice.
There's a lot
cats.
of slick book buyers out there.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Well, we didn't see a lot of nice guys. And the same is true for those of you that aren't doing this. The same thing is true at libraries. I mean, you can use all of these tips to get new library clients. So there's a lot of friends of the library groups that they have the sales or they don't have the sales, or they'll tell you, hey, we don't have any books to buy. But most of the people that go to these places are jerks.
I can honestly say, by having a good demeanor and working well with people, especially one-on-one, when the anxiety of the Facebook isn't on and so forth, you would be surprised some of the stories I haven't told you about exceptions people have made for me.
Well, let's hear some.
I share some of them I don't. I'm just
well. Let's share some of them that you'll share, even if you've already told me the stories.
Yeah, I've made little side bets before where I said, "Hey, I'll bet that entire stock that I can show you how to put a ridiculous amount onto your bottom line if we start selling on Amazon. Why don't you, if you'll allow me to have all of your leftovers, I'll teach you a little bit about Amazon and I'll teach them." And I've gotten over $10,000 for those kind of side bets.
Let's get into that a little bit more.
If you're cool with people, if you give first, they will reciprocate.
But what you're saying,
they want you to come around again.
Got you. But what you're saying is that you've told people before, like, hey, I'm telling you, I think I can do better for you than these other guys do. And in fact, I'm willing to bet you these an amount of books that I can do something for you that other people can't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Amazon's great. It's wonderful. Right. And people who aren't using it correctly, boy, it's a gold mine.
And again, we talked about this earlier, that professors are professors. They're not business people. They're not like e-commerce sellers. They do what they do.
Right.
So let's talk about travel. Let's go and let's talk about how much you travel. So obviously you can't always buy at UK.
Right.
You can't always buy here in Kentucky. How much traveling is required? I guess not maybe required, but how much traveling do you do for this job?
I usually like to stay within a couple hours of home, and I like to be home at night. But I do make, what do you think, 3 or 4 trips a year, up to a week long each time. I like to go to different areas that are hotspots that are underserved. Okay.
And so when you are gone far away, like how long are those trips?
Usually about a week. And sometimes I'll phone solicit to find a good bookstore that's ready to dump a lot of stock. And, a professor, the best professors can be worth $2,000 or $3,000 payout, which means I'll put, 10 grand in my pocket. Whereas the best bookstores can be worth a ridiculous amount. If you get a good bookstore and buy their dead stock, it can, put tens of thousands of dollars in your pocket with one transaction, and then you make them a customer for life. It works well. So I'll travel a long distance for the bookstore stuff. About a week, I think it maybe.
Yeah. What is dead stock?
It's just common terminology they use in the textbook market that denotes what isn't currently selling to students. Okay. Maybe the class isn't adopted, or the textbook is outdated, or something like that. Well, you'd be shocked how many bookstores, the chief motivator is convenience. They want somebody they can call up and say, "Hey, what are you doing next week?" "Well, I do pretty well, so I don't have anything scheduled next week. I'll be there," or I can bump it or whatever. And, for a large bookstore who has a ridiculous amount of books, to be able to get somebody in there with no notice, to give them the red carpet treatment, build them an invoice, build them take these off the spreadsheet and whatnot, and take these out of your inventory. It's very handy.
And I know for a fact, because I'm your friend, I know that you could probably do 3 to 4 times the volume of this stuff that you do now. Right. It's just the lifestyle that you've chosen for you and your family. Right. That you're not working 60, 70 hours a week. No. Or 40. But no, sometimes, Nick and I have been known to take afternoons off to watch it, to go to the theaters before.
Sure.
And that's sort of the thing, is that, I honestly think that it's a good thing to have some time that you just kind of can blow off and just relax for a little bit.
Sure.
'Cause it is, do you find it to be stressful, what you do?
I did. I don't anymore. I love going out and soliciting professors. It's fun because you get to connect with people. You get to discuss current events, and it's just, I enjoy it. I don't know. And it's a treasure hunt. You get to find, a lot of people will treasure hunt in a thrift store, and they'll find, "Hey, I found a $25 book. That's great. But I found a $1,100 set." And it's a lot of fun. I don't know.
And, so how often though, when you're going out to these colleges or wherever you're going, oftentimes you already have a customer or someone that you buy from there already, versus just going completely cold somewhere new?
How often do I do one over the other?
Yeah.
Of course, I go to places that I already have somebody there more often, but I'll make an appointment with one professor, and then I'll knock on 20 doors that I didn't have an appointment with.
What are the days or times that professors are more likely to be in their office?
Let me actually, one thing I didn't mention, you had asked me earlier about how many professors' offices would you have to go through to get a yes if you were brand new cold. Mm-hmm. And I said 1 out of about 25 would be an easy gimme. But I wanted to make sure that that I expressed this with a little bit of sales skill, it would turn into more like 1 out of 10. with a fair amount of sales skill, once you've been doing this for, let's say, a couple months, it would be closer to 1 out of 5 or even better than that. So I didn't want you to think that you're going to have to knock on 25 doors to get a prospect. That's really in the beginning. It will get so much better, and you'll find hot schools and cold schools. There are schools I go to, few and far between, but they do exist where I'm the only one who can get in there, and it's like cutting hair. It's like, next, here's your cash. Next, here's your cash. That's still out there. Buyers will call me a liar, but I can prove it.
That's great to hear. And I think that there's a lot of people that need to know, though, that this takes time. It takes effort. And more so, it takes learning how to be yourself in front of strangers.
Right.
I would say that's the biggest thing, is being able to be you in situations that you might not feel super comfortable with. Because if you're talking to your buddy,
I'm always comfortable, so I don't know what you're getting at.
But if you're talking to your buddy and saying, "Hey, I buy books. I know you might have some books because you teach school over here." You're going to have a much simpler and a much easier approach than if you're talking to a stranger. Right. And so you got to start to feel, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you got to start to feel like, hey, these people, or try to talk to them as though you already know them.
Right. Absolutely.
Instead of saying, one time, Angus, who's my, if you guys don't know, Angus McConnell is he's basically runs a good chunk of Murph Books. And the first time we recorded a video, as soon as I would turn the camera on, he would turn into a whole other person. Almost. So I would say, I would turn on the camera and he would say, "Greetings." He put his hand over his heart and he'd say, "Greetings, I'm Angus McConnell." And I'd turn it off, and then he would seem normal again. And so it took him a while before he started to feel comfortable on video. It's interesting. Now, what I want to do is I want to get to a couple of the questions.
Someone had asked about, do I have any clearance from the universities to be there?
That's a good question. Yeah. So, do you have any clearance? Do you have to go and talk to the universities about being there?
I usually don't. I ask forgiveness, not permission, generally. I will tell you that there are certain universities that I have gotten into that now no longer let anybody, nobody can book buy here, for example, but I'm still in there, so I'm okay. There have been a lot of situations where we don't allow book buyers, but you're okay. Right. And I've had several of those happen. If you're worried about that, start off small with a larger public university. I absolutely encourage you to go to a smaller school down the road, but out of the gate, get your feet wet at a larger public university, because I guarantee they see buyers all the time. And then one advantage you might think, as a person who isn't typically in the field of book buying for academic sources, you might say, what advantage could I possibly have? You really are going to take a lot more stock than other people are. You're going to get excited about a $25 book, and the typical book buyer, not like myself, but like a lot of my competition, is going to say $25, and they're not going to put much towards that. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. Most people, in my opinion, because there's so much easier money on the table, they'd rather just go down the road and only buy books they can make $50 on. Sure. And so they'll just, instead of buying that and doing the work, they'll go leave that meat on the bone and just go and try to buy from another professor.
Oh, I have plenty of competition that will only buy the latest and greatest, and that's great. That's a wonderful strategy. But I can go after that same buyer in every single office and buy lots and lots of books and do very well and develop a relationship to where they say, "Hey, when are you coming to the house? Let's get this library cleaned out." And I get to be that guy a lot. And you'd be surprised how I joke around about this, but when I'm telling the professors, I remind them half my job is to jog your memory. So I'm always reapproaching politely. So after I've gotten this stack of worthless books that they attribute no value to, they've been sitting there forever, they're worth $25 a piece, and I'm giving them literally $2-3 a piece for them. I remind them, well, do you have anything else? Do you have anything hiding under your desk, or here, there, wherever? And you'd be surprised how many say, "Oh yeah, I guess I do have this new thing that I haven't thought of." You'd be surprised how many $150, $200 books I get as a result of hanging in there, buying the cheap books first, and jogging in their memory. Reapproaching is everything. And,
just because I would assume that a lot of these professors are thinking that, well, our local university doesn't want these books they don't want to buy these books, so there must not be value in them, or we're no longer teaching this class anymore, so there's no value in this book. Right. I'm sure that has to happen sometimes.
Sure. And they are also trained by other book buyers. A very typical thing if I compared my numbers to some other book buyers, they would say, oh, I see 80 professors in a day. And my response would be, that's great, but I see probably 20 because I'm working with each one individually so much more. And to each his own, but that's my method. Other people will go like mad, grab up all the newest, latest, and greatest books. But hey, you bought 3 books out of that office. I bought 35. And I know that those 3 books were worth, 5 of my books, but I still got 35 books out of that office, and you could have had them all. You just chose not to. And I've got that customer calling me back,
right,
inviting me over. I've had, lunches with plenty of professors off campus just as friends because you develop that rapport.
Yeah. And I mean, that's honestly one of the ways that we started working a lot together, is that same kind of thing where we started talking and I mean, you were always way before, we did anything together. You were always calling me and saying, oh, I have something that can help you with this, or I have something that can help you with that. And to this day, whenever, like the carpeting for the new store, and anytime I think of, I need this, my first thought is, hey, Nick Jump probably knows somebody that can help me with that.
Might be true.
And it's almost always the case because you collect people. I mean, that's what your business really is you collect people up and down everywhere. And you have these relationships that you can call on to buy books or supplies or whatever it is.
Sure.
I think that's what makes you special.
I appreciate that.
I mean, we're staying a little close right now. But yeah, no, honestly, I think that's what makes
my wife's in the room though. So
yeah,
it's okay.
I think that's what makes you unique. And a lot of people that we work with that you just collect people up and down the highway all the time. So let's talk then about the event. Let's talk about Bustproof Live. A lot of people they're listening to this and are watching this are thinking about whether to come or they are coming. Now, last year, I know that you and Anitra, you gave a 60 or 90-minute presentation, and we had to shut them down from the Q&A because we had to move on.
Right.
But a lot of people were the most interested in what you guys do because it's something that they hadn't been exposed to.
Right.
So, I mean, outside of answering all of their questions, which we'll spend as much time there as we can, what is something that folks can do? Are there any books that you suggest that they read for people that have trouble with this kind of thing in terms of like working with people, or what is a tip that you can get?
Sure. The only really my favorite salesy guy to follow would be Zig Ziglar. I mean, he passed not too long ago, but his material is solid, and it's all about being genuine. There are definitely tactics to it, but essentially, don't take it personal. When people reject you, as long as you're being polite and being your genuine self, reapproach and get used to that, or get out of sales.
For sure. We're all in sales. I mean, even if, no matter what you do, even if you have a job, a 9-to-5 job, doing whatever, you're still in sales. You have to sell yourself to your boss all the time. And so sales is pretty amazing. And the people that are successful with it are the people that are willing to be told no. And it seems counterintuitive a little bit to some people, but if you're buying books to sell online, you are in sales, not on Amazon, but with all your suppliers and all the people that you're buying from. You're trying to sell them on letting you buy their stuff.
I've gotten some sweet deals from bookstores, from thrift stores, you name it. They're as long as you connect with people, they'll roll out the red carpet for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today, Nick, and I will see you at Bustproof Live in June.
That's all for this episode of the Bustproof Business Podcast. Be sure to point your browser to bustproofworkshop.com to sign up for our mailing list and to get your opportunity to enroll in one of our specialized seminars, guaranteeing you continued results in typical Bustproof fashion. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to taking your business to the next level right here on the Bustproof Business Podcast.